Before anyone ever called a school like Davidson College highly selective, I knew it was. I also knew that my background was a lot less privileged than many of my classmates. But I figured a shared commitment to the place, the mission, would level the playing field. I figured race, gender, social caste didn't really matter as much there. But on a spring day in 1982, I walked into some truth, and I got mad. I walked right into the Civil War. Now, that's not how my classmates saw it. They were not, as they explained to me, glorifying slavery. They were celebrating a time when chivalry was alive and women sat on wide porches sipping mint juleps. Now, we all know who built those porches, grew that mint, then made and served those juleps. And I never got over it. In fact, I followed what made me mad. And doing that has brought me here today to talk about something that makes me and probably most of you mad. Diversity, or rather the lack of it in corporate America. Following what makes me mad about that has turned me into something I like to call a diversity pragmatist. Someone who looks for objective ways to deal with some highly subjective issues. And right now, I stay pretty busy. Because right now, everybody is talking about diversity, specifically race. But why? And why in business? And what has any of this got to do with you? Well, there are 3 reasons why we should talk about race in business. First, business benefits. Ethnically diverse companies are 35% more likely to earn higher returns. Companies with ethnically diverse boards are 43% more likely to experience higher profits. Second, talking about the possibilities of diversity in general distracts from the realities created by ignoring race in particular. All diversity matters, but all diversity isn't created equal, which is why professional settings look a little bit like this. Business is simply more comfortable with some forms of diversity than it is with others. And the third reason why we need to talk about race in business is because that's where we can really start undoing the damage of racism. Think about it this way. The 25 biggest companies in this country employ over 6% of the workforce. 25 little microcosms with people of all different colors and ethnicities joined in one cause under a single banner, the company logo. And that's exactly why business is exactly the place where we most need to talk about race. After all, there are 157 million people in the U.S. workforce alone, people of all races, spending 1/3 of our lives united in the spirit of wanting a paycheck and having to show up to get it. But for business to actually make the difference it can make, there are a few things we must all accept. 3 truths. Systemic racism is real, and your company suffers from it. Inclusion is an ideal, but few companies actually practice it. And right now, people of color, especially Black people, are not okay, and you must pay attention to that. The lie? This will all blow over. It won't. So what does that have to do with you? What in truth can you do? Is this really your problem to solve? You bet it is. I've been writing for CEOs and city leaders for years. Haven't met any who didn't think diversity and inclusion are critical. Haven't met any who were happy about what their companies are doing or their cities are doing on that front, including your own. I'm sure you're all familiar with what your mayor said in 2016 and then a couple of weeks recently. 4 years ago, he acknowledged the need. A few weeks ago, he named the barrier to meeting that need. So let's examine what you can do individually and institutionally to dismantle that very same barrier. You start with yourself. Look inside and check your unconscious bias. Yes, you have it. It's those thoughts about people you didn't know you had, your blind spots. And you're not a bad person for having them. You're simply a person. Our brains process 11 million pieces of information per minute. but we're aware of only about 40 of those pieces. Only about 2% of our emotional cognition is available consciously. And our racial bias, well, it lives in our unconscious, where messages can be and are shaped to hit us right there. Being conscious of your unconscious bias is the first step in overcoming it. So if your company offers some form of unconscious bias training, take it. If you're in charge of seeing to it that your company does, make it happen. Pay attention, use the tools, turn your unconscious bias into conscious inclusion. And that requires a second step, understanding what inclusion really is, or rather, what it isn't. It's not diversity. Diversity is something you have. Inclusion is something you do. Diversity is a numbers game. Inclusion is about impact. Diversity is a fact. Inclusion, well, it's a choice. Diversity requires intention to stop. Inclusion demands intention to start. Diversity is aspirational. Inclusion is actionable. And once you understand what inclusion is, the next step is understanding how it works. Well, there's one group of people who are always excluded, the invisible people. And that's what you make people, invisible, when you start saying you're colorblind, because you're not. You're not colorblind. Stop saying it. It's not true. It's not possible. And people of color hate hearing it. Because when you say you don't see color, what you're really saying is that you've decided not to see the things that accrue from color. Characteristics, traits, nuances, histories that people of color want you to see, that we think are important and beautiful. So colorblind is really just color biased. Try being color brave instead. Embrace the unique characteristics that are developed as a result of this thing that we call color. Because that's the first step in becoming an ally. Allyship is always on. Allyship adapts to the situation at hand. But all allyship starts with being able to see and then talk about race. And for many of us, that's scary. But I'm going to help you do it. You start by asking. Don't assume you know the lived experience of anyone else. Trust me, you do not. Ask somebody. And then absorb what they have to say and listen. Really listen. And then you accept that what they say is true. I didn't say acknowledge. I said accept. Because then you have to adjust your own beliefs, accepting that what they are is just that, beliefs, not truths, beliefs. And then, only then, articulate. Listen, Black people talking to other Black people about Black people is necessary for survival. But white people talking intelligently, informally to other white people about Black people is necessary for change. It's about being intentional, consciously, actively, consistently, intentionally rejecting racism. It's not enough to say and not enough to be not racist. As your mayor said, you don't get a participation ribbon in the fight against injustice. You have to be anti-racist. When people like us, the ones who lead the teams, run the companies, and make the laws, decide to be intentional, things happen. The needle moves. And then business, more than any other institution, taps into its superpower to dismantle racism. But unlocking that power calls for three things: identifying real problems, assigning real measures, instituting real consequences. And the operative word is real. Real problems. Those are the things that diversity can really solve, uniquely. In any good business decision, the first question before deploying any resource is, what are we solving for? Diversity, racial diversity, is a resource. It's an asset. The question is, how are you using it? If you have not identified the problems diversity solves in your organization, then you are not making the most of it. In inclusive companies, real problems are the ones that leverage diversity to address real issues. And real issues are measured with real numbers. Forget about aspirational goals. Do you have aspirational sales goals? Aspirational production goals? No. You have metrics that make sense, metrics that mean something, metrics that align with your strategic goals. But what if we assign metrics like that to inclusion? What if we set inclusion goals, establish benchmarks, moved beyond short-term linear assessments to really understand the value that inclusion brings? One thing we know for sure: what gets measured gets done. And we also know that what is incentivized is prioritized. As important as measuring is, measures don't matter if consequences don't count. In business and life, people do what they are incentivized to do, period. Start attaching bonuses or bye-byes to inclusion metrics and watch what happens. Inclusion is no different than any other business imperative. What if we treated it like one? Ask yourself this: what if business stopped admiring the problem of diversity and got focused on inclusion? What if organizations stopped waiting for inclusion to sprout organically and started nurturing it intentionally? What if the world of business could finally see that we, more than any other entity, can actually do something to solve the world's biggest problem? I believe we are the ones our companies, the city, and this world have been waiting for. I believe we are the ones who can turn this moment into a movement. And I believe we are the ones who can unleash the power of business to unlock the true power of diversity. Thank you.